Call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the TBARTA May 17th board meeting. We are at PSTA's auditorium. Melanie, can you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Jennifer, call the roll, please.
Jim Holton.
Present.
Melanie Griffin.
Here.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Kemp. Commissioner Reggie Bellamy.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey. Commissioner Karen Seal.
Present.
Rich McLean.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman and Mayor Jane Castor are both excused, along with Secretary Mandy. He does have a replacement here, Nicole Mills, and Cliff Manuel is also excused.
And, Mr. Chair, if I may, Commissioner Starkey is on her way. She just had a little bit of a, she'll be late.
Okay.
She's on her way.
I'm sure she can tell us about it.
Uh-huh.
Do we have a quorum?
We do.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the next item of business is public comment, and could you read the public comment PSA, please?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended to up to 30 minutes.
I don't have any comment cards. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make public comment? Okay, none being heard, there is no public comment, and that is closed. The next item of business is the consent agenda items.
Move approval.
Been motion for the minutes? Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any objections to the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Next item is presentation and action items, and the chair recognizes Debbie Leone. Debbie Leouse, sorry.
Good morning. This morning before you is the action item for approving policies for travel and expense reimbursements. These policies have been reviewed by the Policy Committee both last month and this month. They set forth guidelines for timely reimbursement of all expenditures and exactly how to do it and the proper forms to do it on. We took a look at this because the policy had not existed before, and we had received some reimbursement requests that dated back a little bit longer than we had wanted to have. So this will give us a guideline for both staff and the board to go by. If you've had a chance to review them, I would entertain any questions or comments.
Nope.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
I just wanted to note that at the policy committee meeting, we did not have a quorum, but we did discuss the revised budget, the revised policy. The word may was added to it, so that it does give flexibility to our executive director that if there is a reimbursement that's submitted after 30 days, that everybody's encouraged to follow the 30-day policy, but then it does give him flexibility that if something arose as a reasonable circumstance, he can still go ahead and approve that reimbursement. And so with that change, while the policy committee couldn't vote on it, the members that were in attendance, myself, Commissioner Long, and Vice Chair Cliff Manuel, felt comfortable with the policy and recommended the board go ahead and pass it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Janet.
Yes. I also wanted to let everyone here in the audience know that when Debbie gave her finance report at the Finance Committee, she indicated that our net income currently is $103,973, and there's a $23,000 under budget income year to date. I thought that was pretty significant considering where we've been and where we are today. And number two, that the revenues are below budget primarily due to the timing of the RTDP, and expenses are also under budget. Thank you, Debbie, for doing such a great job. And at the end of April, TBARTA had about $56,000 in their operating checking account.
Fantastic. Do you want to complete that report during the Finance Committee report, or were you?
Well,
Yeah,
yes, but every
segueing
time I
into that.
see Debbie, it's, finance, and finance, so.
Thank you, Debbie. Melanie, the chair recognizes you for other comments on the Policy Committee report.
Then do we want to go ahead and vote on the policy and then vote on the resolution separately, or do we go ahead and, with the resolution, I will say that there was a recommendation that I believe it's previous third paragraph, be taken out. So I'm not sure if Michael Case is on the phone, if he wants to explain the proposed resolution, and then with the change that was recommended and agreed to by staff, then the 3 policy committee members that were present at our meeting also recommended that the board go ahead and vote positively on this proposed resolution as well.
Is Michael on the phone?
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Michael, why don't you take us through the basics of the resolution?
Sure. So, recall, you had a presentation at the last board meeting from consultants Scott Lane of Stantec and Jeff Kramer of Cutter. They summarized the final report and its recommendations to you. As Melanie mentioned, this resolution was brought before the Policy Committee at its May 10th meeting for review, and was recommended to be brought to you this morning with a few small tweaks. To summarize it in general, the resolution formally accepts the results of the study, motions to close the project, and transmit the full final report to FDOT Districts 1 and 7, members of our Bay Area Legislative Delegation, the TED committees, the leadership of the House and Senate, and the individual MPO boards. There was, under the non-marital section, an additional paragraph that is no longer in the resolution that talked about encouraging the MPOs to continue the conversation, though it was observed that that could be taken as an endorsement, and that is not the purpose of this resolution, only to accept the resolution and to accept the study closing the project. So, as it is in your package this morning, staff is recommending adoption of the resolution, and if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for Michael? None being heard, I'll accept a motion for approval.
Move approval?
Second?
Been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Michael. Did we need to vote on the guidelines for reimbursement, or is that
I believe
ready
so,
for-
because the policy committee was unable to do so due to lack of in-person quorum.
Right.
Can you give us a motion for that?
Yes, I move that as the policy as amended in our packet be approved by the board this morning.
Second?
It's been a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Motion carries. Melanie, does that conclude your report?
Mostly, just as an FYI, the legislature did not pass any language regarding TBARTA members being able to attend meetings by a phone and still count towards the quorum. And so the policy committee will look at that at its next meeting to see what we might want to do to foster in-person attendance. And that concluded our report.
Yeah, I would concur with that, and talking to our lobbyist as well, we might want to look, the policy committee might want to look at an overall kind of cleanup of the TBARTA legislation, since it's been amended numerous times, and there could be other cleanup provisions, and try to do this in one full swoop. So we'll defer to our esteemed lobbyists and their recommendations on that as well when they give us that. But I think that the policy committee should probably look at that.
Perfect, we will do so.
Great. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Chair recognizes Janet Long for the Finance Committee report.
Yes, and I want to let you know, I've already given you the numbers a little bit, but that next month, we're going to have a report from the Audit Committee, correct, Debbie? And the forensic audit is going to cover most of the fiscal year, and the audit findings will include those that were presented then. And then I think we've all introduced Melanie Williams to everyone. Raise your hand, Melanie, so everybody knows. She's our new senior accountant at TBARTA, and she's been doing a fabulous job working with the auditors. So that's the end of our,
Congratulations.
that's the end of our finance report, Mr. Chair. And if we want to move that through the board accepts it, that'd be great.
Okay, yes, do you have, would you like to?
I'd like to make a motion that the finance report be accepted and approved.
So moved.
Thank you.
It's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you for that.
Well,
Janet, anything further from the Finance Committee?
nope, just have some info on the legislative
I will
piece.
recognize you again for the legislative report.
So I think everyone has gotten the memo that we had a very successful legislative session, and while Ron Pierce, our advocate, is coming forward to the podium, I would like to request that the changes for next year with regard to our strategy be, before they come to finance, come to the legislative committee. Ron and I have already had a little bit of a strategy session for going forward this year with regard to the amendments that we wanted this year, that there was no vehicle to amend them onto. And so we think we have some pretty solid thought processes to share with you when we have our next legislative committee. And with that, Ron, do you want to give us all the nuts and bolts of what happened this session?
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning. Session ended on May the 4th, which was one day over, by the way. We were supposed to end on Friday, May the 3rd. We didn't, the legislature didn't quite get the budget on the desk of the legislators for the 72-hour cooling off period, so they adjourned on that Saturday afternoon. Just a quick kind of snapshot of session. Over 2,000 bills were filed, 196 actually passed. And I'll give you a summary, by the way, of everything I'm talking about when I'm done here. But 196 bills passed, which is actually 4 less than last year. That's kind of the new trend. You're seeing less and less bills passed in Tallahassee. One of the reasons being is you're seeing a lot more packages that are passing, a lot of trains that are passing, where they're putting multiple pieces of legislation onto one bill. This year's budget in Tallahassee was $91 billion, largest state budget in Florida's history. Record funding for education, record funding for the environment in those bills, as well as, I know the Secretary will appreciate this, they fully funded the DOT work plan, which is obviously very, very important to our efforts here. From an agenda standpoint for TBARTA, as you all recall, our agenda included 2 main items. Number one was requesting $1.5 million in operating dollars for TBARTA, as well as making some statutory changes to our Enabling Act. Let me start off with the good news from a funding standpoint is we requested $1.5 million. We actually got $2.5 million. I can tell you not many organizations in Tallahassee during session asked for less money than they received. So we were very well positioned for that. I can tell you we've got some folks to thank for that. Number one would be President Galvano. He's very supportive of your efforts, very supportive of making sure that you're funded in such a way that you're relevant and making sure you have the dollars to complete your mission. Number two was Senator Travis Hudson from the Jacksonville area. Again, he was very involved in making that happen, as well as Representative Jackie Toledo and Representative Chris Sprouse as well. So those are the 4 people that we should probably give kudos to for making sure we got the $2.5 million. If you're wondering how we got the $2.5 million, first of all, it's all non-recurring. Let me start with that. We were hoping to try to get some version of recurring revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you, if you look at the overall budget and look at the projects that are out there, there were very, very few what I would call member projects such as this that were funded with recurring revenue, basically none. The only, if you look at the Transportation Economic Development Appropriations Committee, when it was finalized, the only real projects that got new recurring dollars were state colleges and universities. And that was really in the education silo. If you look in the TED silo, there was basically none that were funded with new recurring. So we got non-recurring revenue. I will tell you the good news is I think we do have a commitment from President Galvano and also Senator Simpson following that to ensure that we continue to get this funding moving forward until we get to a project where we can get sustained funding out of that sometime in the future. Why the additional $1 million, you ask? So the legislature, particularly on the Senate side, started looking at, there was a number of individual projects that folks were trying to fund out of Tampa Bay. And the legislature kind of took a step back and said, look, the entire mission and purpose of TBARTA is to look at how do these type of projects would fit into a regional transportation system. And so they said, instead of them having to kind of be, referee the food fight of who gets funded and who doesn't get funded, they said, look, there's probably 3 or 4 projects we would like you to take a look at. They actually put some proviso language, which I'll read to you. Basically, they want, of the funds of the $1.5 million, let's see, they want $1 million should be used for the study and development of innovative options for transit. Innovative options include but are not limited to the study of smart city innovations, autonomous vehicle services, multimodal transportation, hyperloop technology, cable and lightweight overhead road and strings or above ground transit, and public zero emissions transit. The great thing is they did not tie your hands. They said, look, here's a lot of innovation, related type activities that are out there that from a feasibility study standpoint we could look at, but they're not telling you how to spend those dollars. So we'll work with David. I think there's some groups that are going to come forward looking for funding in the near future. Some of those folks that were looking for money in Tallahassee. I will tell you the governor does not have the budget yet. So this is not quite done. I think we're almost there. The governor will probably get the budget sometime next week. If you look at the way the House and Senate have been kind of orchestrating and releasing these dollars, or the budget, the legislative bills so far to the governor, as they release them in small batches, the governor's actually signing those batches pretty quick. We expect the governor to probably get the budget sometime next week. I can tell you, the governor and his staff are already looking at the budget. They've already started calling members, letting them know of different projects that may be vetoed. So far, we have very good news on our project. I can tell you that President Galvano is very supportive. The governor's office knows this is a priority of President Galvano. Obviously, it's nothing guaranteed, but I think we're very well positioned with the governor's office for them understanding the need of protecting the $2.5 million for our appropriations project. So, as was mentioned by Melanie, we did not get the 2 items we were trying to get into a transportation package relating to televoting and also allowing a mayor's designee to be appointed as well. There was a DOT package that passed. To be honest with you, it was not a good fit to be in that bill. We actually were included in a general transportation bill that was on the Senate side. Unfortunately, it ran out of time, never got quite to the point where we could amend it to something else. And I'll be honest with you, we ran out of vehicles and we ran out of options. So kind of where we are at this point is, and I've talked a little bit about with Mr. Chairman, I've talked to Commissioner Long, and love to have a conversation with you as well, Melanie, is looking at next year, what is our strategy moving forward? I think number one, as we take a step back, one of the things we may want to look at is instead of trying to do an amendment moving forward, we may want to see if we want to just do a general bill, do a bill basically that would open up our enabling act that's relating to TBARTA. And if there's anything else we want changed in there, we could basically do a cleanup at that point in time. If we're going to do that, let me remind everybody that next year's session starts early. It starts in January. Committee weeks start in September. You've got 1 committee week in September, 2 in October, 2 in November, 1 in December. So you've got a total of 6 committee weeks kind of leading into session, but session starts on January the 14th. So from a legislative agenda standpoint, as I'm telling you about what happened in 2019, we need to start thinking about right now what's going to happen in 2020. I would encourage you all, I think, have the policy committee, the legislative committee kind of look at, I think, a couple things. Number one, obviously you're going to want to go back after the $1.5 million. I will tell you, I think there will be an additional opportunity to get additional funding for feasibility projects moving forward, which I can tell you, one of the biggest takeaways this session is for the legislature to give you more money to show that they think you are relevant and you're doing innovative things in the region is critically important. So I think that will lead to additional opportunities from a funding standpoint, not only next year, but possibly beyond that. And then we need to look at from an agenda standpoint is, do we want to do a standalone bill? Do we try to do amendments again? What does that kind of look like? So with committee week starting in September, I would encourage you from an agenda standpoint to have your agenda completed. I'd have the committee work done over the summer. I would have the full board actually approve your agenda in September, and then start working that agenda in September and October moving forward as we head into the 2020 legislative session. One final point on your revenue, and we actually may need the Secretary's help on this. We are having conversations in Tallahassee. The way right now DOT wanted to treat the money, we've already talked to the governor's office, we've talked to DOT, we've also talked to President Galvano's office. Typically, the 2.5 non-recurring, it's grant dollars. They want to treat it as a grant where we would get reimbursed for those dollars. That's not going to work for David and his team because he needs the 1.5 from an operating standpoint. So we're working with the governor's office, and they understand the need. We've already talked to Chris Spencer up there as well as some of his team. We've also reached out to the DOT secretary and his team as well to talk about working and giving us the 1.5 million up front, and then having to then be transparent and accountable on how we're spending those dollars moving forward. And I think we'll be able to get there. Any questions, comments?
I'd like to make one thank you for great service up there this past session. I think we got more than we anticipated. My discussions with Senator Hudson were very positive, and he wants to see TBARTA's role expanded and really doing everything that FDOT is not charged to do. So we look forward to that tasking and working with you and the team, kind of in line with your suggestions. I would encourage the policy committee and legislative committee to work with staff to set perhaps a larger meeting during the summer so we can get ready to approve a whole legislative package in the September meeting, because there is scarcely a little time as the session is abbreviated next year, starts early next year. So thanks for a great report. Any further questions for Ron?
Mr. Chair.
Chair Long.
I would like to thank you, Ron, and thank you, Natalie, and Alan's not here, but please express my thanks and my appreciation for the great job that you did. More than anything, I appreciate your constant contact with regard to the moving pieces that were going on during session. And I know we're being streamed, and a lot of what we talk about is on the public record. So I would like to request that we not get stuck on the 1.5 million recurring dollar amount, because I do believe that TBARTA is on a trajectory. We are in a better place today than we've ever been before. And I would like us over the summer to be having our working legislative meetings while at the same time working in concert with David and Debbie to make sure that what we ask for is what we need, and to anticipate the growth and the opportunities so that we don't miss anything, because I do believe that very shortly we are going to be in a position to actually turn the dirt and start a real, honest-to-God project to benefit our entire region, and I couldn't be more excited about that. Lastly, I am grateful for the amount of work that this team set up for us while we were in Tallahassee to speak to our senators, our legislators, and the governor's office. And if you think we weren't moving around up there, for those of you that have been in the Capitol, you know it's not an easy place to go from one side to the next and up and down and all around. We had 16 meetings in one day. So there was no grass growing under our feet while we were there, and I thank you, and thank you. And lastly, Mr. Chair, if I could just have a point of privilege to recognize a former colleague of mine, County Commissioner Ronnie Duncan, walked into the room. Please stand up so everybody sees you, because for a long, long time, he was the chair of TBARTA, did a fabulous job, and I know he would be stunned to hear the financial situation that we are in today. You walked in a little bit late to hear the finance report, but we actually are doing great. So thank you for all the work you did to pave the way for where we are today. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, Janet, and I'd like to echo those comments. Ronnie, it's great to see you. We actually we're going to give you an award one meeting, and I think you were traveling or something out of town, but we'd like to reschedule that again at your convenience for all the great work you did to set the stage for this board to move forward. And again, thank you for your effort and service to the state and the community. We appreciate that. Does that conclude the legislative report?
Yes, sir.
No, thank you. Citizens Advisory Committee report, there's no May meetings for that. The Transit Management Committee report, there was no May meetings either. Now turn to item 6, and informational items, and the chair recognizes Bill Ball on Regional Transit Development Plan.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I will ask if Michael wants to introduce the item before I get started. I think he's still on the line.
Michael?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So this is the Envision 2030 Regional Transit Development Plan, which you're all aware is a plan that TBARTA is required to put together as a legislative overhaul that we experienced in 2016-17. We have kicked off the project back in February, shortly after the contract was approved with Tyndale Oliver. They've been doing a great job so far. We are still in the early stages of the project. We just kicked off the first public outreach campaign early last month, which an email was shared with you all with some of the events where we're going to have the team set up with surveys and collecting information on transit needs around the region. The purpose of this presentation this morning is just to give you an overview of what the project is going to be doing, what we have been doing recently, and give the opportunity to ask questions or consult with who you have. So with that, Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. My name is Bill Ball with Tyndale Oliver, and I'm pleased to be here as the project manager for this project on the Envision 2030 Regional Transit Development Plan. I just want to give you a brief overview of the project, introduce it. This is the first time we've had a chance to talk about the project with the board since we got started. So you'll see the items on this list we're going to cover briefly today. See if you have any comments and questions as we continue to work forward. It's really, I would say, a really unique opportunity for TBARTA and the board to do the first ever regional transit development plan for the Tampa Bay area. And in addition to that, it's an opportunity for the board to build consensus on what the role that TBARTA will play in the next 10 years as it relates to transit in this region. So what is a transit development plan? I know some of you are on local boards that have participated in this process at the local level. So we're just taking this perspective to the regional level. The first item in the state of Florida, it's a requirement to receive state block grants for transit. So one, this sets you the stage for future funding at the state level in addition to what you're achieving through the legislature. Secondly, it's your opportunity to really put your vision together for the next 10 years. And more importantly, a blueprint for how you're going to move towards that vision. And then third, you can use it as a tool. Staff will use this as a tool to promote TBARTA, to promote the vision for the agency in the coming years. It's not intended to be a detailed budget or a capital improvement program, although it will have a lot of information that will help staff do that on an annual basis. This focuses on vision. These are the key elements that we go through in putting together the 10-year plan. You can see we walk through a pretty standardized process to meet the state requirements, but more importantly, we customize the project objectives to meet the needs of the agency, which is a big part of this regional perspective in terms of what the role of TBARTA will play in the future. Some of the specific requirements that come from both the TBARTA Act, and there's also a Florida statute for transit development plan requirements. You can see that it's a 10-year plan requirement, so this Envision 2030 will be out that 10 years out to 2030. You're required to update that in a major way every 5 years with progress reports in the years in between. And then, of course, this board must adopt the plan and submit it to the Florida DOT by the deadline that you're assigned each year, which is September 1st of 2020 for your first one. When I talk about schedule, you'll see that we're going to be well in advance of that deadline next year. Of course, it's the 5-county service area with the 5 existing transit operators that we're working closely with here in the region. And here's the team. The TBARTA staff we're working closely with, both on the technical side and the public outreach side. A lot of the new names on the list that were added in recent months as well. And then Tyndale Oliver is the lead on this particular contract, and we have some support from sub-consultants as well. We're also working very closely with the technical advisory group, which has 12 members, 1 from each of the transit operators, those 5, the 2 from DOT, District 1 and District 7, And then we have 4 workforce development boards in the region as well, and each of them have a representative on this committee as well. Actually, that's a requirement in the TDP statute to involve the workforce development boards, and it makes good sense to do that anyway. And then finally, we have a representative from the MPO staff directors to involve the MPOs in this process as well. Here's our schedule. I think there's a bigger version in your packets, but it's basically a 16-month schedule where and I'll just hit the highlights, and if you have questions about it, we can talk about it at the end. But we're envisioning a draft report in the January-February timeframe so that we could get your feedback and input and then finalize something for adoption by May of next year, well in advance of that September deadline that we have for the Florida DOT.
I don't think we had that scheduled.
Yeah, we don't.
We will get that sent out to you separately then, so you have a bigger version of it.
Great.
In terms of project objectives, there's 5 I want to focus on today. These are the key objectives for the overall plan. The first one is one that we'll take care of as the consultants. We'll make sure you meet the requirements that we set out to meet. The other 4 are more important in terms of what you're going to accomplish here with TBARTA. That second one is, of course, putting together that consensus on the regional transit vision. The third one, which is critical for this plan, is understanding the organizational and financial strategy for TBARTA and what it's going to evolve to over the next 10 years. The fourth one is one that David has charged us with from day one, is we need to put together these, I guess, the low-hanging fruit regional transit projects by the end of this calendar year so that we have projects ready to go if and when funding were to become available for implementation. So that's one of our charges, is to lay those projects out early in the process before we've even finished this plan so the board would have the opportunity to pursue implementation if they chose to do so. And then finally, an action plan to step-by-step process responsibilities, roles for implementing what we need to do to get this vision achieved over the next 10 years. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about TBARTA's role. We do get guidance from the TBARTA Act, your enabling legislation, which says that we need to have consensus on what TBARTA's role in the region is going to be in transit operations, in transit planning, in transit funding, and in collaboration with the local transit providers. So those are the 4 items that we'll be working with you interactively over the next 7-8 months to determine what you and we will provide guidance on what that role should be in each of those areas. One of the ways we're going to help you do that is we're going to identify 6 regional transit entities around the country that we can use as peer examples so that we can have lessons learned from those, best practices that we can use to identify what would be most applicable for application here in the Tampa Bay area. I have one example that will likely be one of the ones that we use, which is in the Atlanta area. This is the Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority. They call it the ATL. About a year ago, they established this new regional transit authority in the Atlanta area. Has a lot of similarities to TBARTA, even a bigger metro region with 10 transit agencies, multiple counties, a board that has a similar size. And they have these 5 responsibilities as the new ATL. Two of them I will mention in particular. They are responsible for putting together a regional transit plan, similar to what you're doing here. And they do have oversight responsibility for transit funding that flows into that 12 county or 13 county region. So this is one of the 6 examples that we're going to put detailed case studies together so you can see how they're doing it in other parts of the country. Defining what regional is will be an important step as well. Again, we do have some guidance on what a regional transit project is from the TBARTA Act. And currently that guidance is if the project crosses a county line, inter-county, or if it's a project within a county that is the first phase or a phase of a broader project that would cross county lines. So that's the guidance we have so far. There are nuances to that definition. So we will be bringing our thoughts on what that definition should be back to the board so that there is general and consensus on an agreement on what a regional transit project is. We have, as Michael mentioned, we're moving forward with public outreach. We already started the branding concept, which is Envision 2030 for transit in Tampa Bay. And we have the webpage set up where you have information, the fact sheet about the project. We have a link to the survey that we've started a little over a week ago. We have activated the survey, and I think we have almost 200, as of this morning, we have almost 200 completed surveys. And you can see that we have a number of events that we're going to this coming month, one of which we did last weekend at the Tampa Train Day, which is a great venue. These venues were selected more to get information out and to encourage people to go complete the survey, either on tablets at the event or information to go back to the website later. So these are the 4 events that are coming up later in this coming month, one in each of the counties. So we'll continue to collect data, get more surveys completed, and that survey will be open until July 1st so that we can get as many as we can throughout the region. One thing that we will do following the June 1st, the final event here, is take a look at where the surveys are coming from by zip code at that point in time to see how spread out and diversified the input is coming from. So if there are certain areas of the region that we're not capturing, we have another month to target those areas and try to get more surveys completed and get all of the areas covered within the region. I mentioned the early projects in a previous slide. What we want to do here is we're going to be doing the technical analysis over the summer, and we'll be identifying and prioritizing projects. And we do feel like we can identify some projects that are ready to be moved forward if funding were to be available. And that's a strong target to have those available to you by the end of this calendar year. We did put some potential examples on this slide just to start the discussion, but we will be working towards identifying a prioritized list of projects for your consideration later this year. For example, Manatee County Area Transit currently operates the Skyway Connection. It's a limited bus service that goes from Manatee to Pinellas over the Skyway, but it's so limited that it was not a viable service for commuters today. So if we increase the level of service, that could be a viable service for commuting connection as an example. Of course, there's a lot of discussion about the ferry service. That could certainly be one of the ones that we add to the list for TBARTA. We have some service to the Tampa International Airport from both PSTA and HART. We could increase that service. We could provide new services that provide access to that. And then finally, some express bus services from the northern counties, from both Hernando and Pasco to the southern counties, could be on that list as well. So those are just some examples that we will be looking at and considering as we bring that list back to you for early implementation. Finally, we're working on the early tasks, baseline conditions, and evaluating the transit needs for the community compared to what's out there today. And we are then focusing on those peer regional transit entities so that we can do those case studies and bring those examples back to you in terms of best practices throughout the country. And then welcome you to visit the public outreach or complete the needs survey if you haven't already. And we also have been getting the word out through presentations. You can see some that we've already done to the staff directors, to the TBARTA CAC, the TMC, and of course the board today, and we've got a number of ones scheduled in the coming months as well. So with that, that's where we are to date, and we'd be happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you for that presentation. One question I have, and actually a suggestion, I think it would be helpful for the whole board if you, when summarizing the best practices of the other organizations throughout the country, maybe do kind of a matrix or a chart with the different funding sources and so forth, so we can have an easy comparison to do that. I think that would be very helpful as we go through our dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what the intent is to, once we identify the 6 we want to use, is to have like a one-page infographic for each one.
Precisely.
And then a summary graphic that would show the comparative statistics about the key factors that we want to compare across those.
Are all those based on state enabling legislation themselves, or were they something that sprung up organically from?
It varies. The one Atlanta's was based on state legislation. We're going to be looking, it looks like we did a preliminary assessment. The ones that seem to be popping up that we think we're moving forward with, I'll just mention a couple for sure, is Atlanta, Seattle, Phoenix, and Minneapolis. Those are the 4 that come to mind. We're kind of finalizing all of the characteristics of like 20 or 25 that we started with to pick the ones that each have a best practice and a number of factors that we want to focus on here.
Great. Other questions? Thanks so much for
Thank
that
you.
presentation. We look forward to working with you.
You too.
The chair now recognizes Cindy Raskin.
Morning.
Good morning, Board. I'm Cindy Raskin. I'm your Director of Commuter Services. And today I just wanted to give you a brief overview about what the Commuter Services program is that TBARTA offers in the Tampa Bay area. And then in the future, if there are any areas you'd like more in-depth information, we can certainly do presentations really specific to those items. So first of all, the purpose of the Commuter Services Division at TBARTA is to help reduce traffic congestion in the Tampa Bay area. So we just heard about the Regional Transit Development Plan. That's a 10-year plan. Our 41-mile project has gone into the development and environmental phase. So those are things that are farther off in the future. But there are things we can do right now in the Tampa Bay area to help reduce traffic congestion. And that's what the Commuter Services Division at TBARTA is all about. We help travelers in Tampa Bay find ways to travel other than driving in their cars alone. So we put together packages that include carpool, vanpool, biking, walking, public transit, telecommuting, largely going out to businesses and having conversations with them about how they can introduce those programs to their employees. There are some tax benefits that we mentioned to them that could be beneficial to their employees and also to their organization. The program is funded by the Florida Department of Transportation. We really appreciate that partnership that we have with the Secretary and Katina and the rest of the group that help us make that project possible. Our service area for the commuter services is a little bit different than the regular TBARTA service area. We include Citrus, but we don't include Manatee, and that's based upon where the DOT district lines are drawn. So some statistics, recent statistics, we have over 4,000 commuters in our database right now. People can go into the database, say that they're interested in carpooling, put in their starting and ending addresses, and they can be matched with other carpoolers in the area. They can also be matched with van pools, which are good for longer distance travel. In the month of March, we had over 200,000 alternative trips that were taken by the people in our database, and over 2 million miles were saved. So that's more than 4 round trips to and from the moon. It's pretty impressive. Van pools are a big part of the program that we offer. As of March, we had 143 van pools. I think for April, we were up to 145. We do that in partnership with Enterprise. Commute by Enterprise is the division that handles van pools. And our Tampa Bay Commute Enterprise group was actually #1 in the nation for the month of March, which is pretty exciting for us. Our goal is to reach 230 vans in 2020 and then 290 vans in 2021. And the van pool miles that are traveled are very important to TBARTA because those miles equal federal 5307 funding dollars. This year we got $587,000 from FTA directly as a result of the van pool miles in our program. So of course, making a successful program means we need to have a strong team. So the first step of developing the team was bringing me on board as the first ever director of commuter services to work on building that team. So right now we do have a job posted. If you know anyone that's looking that would like to help people learn about commute alternatives, please invite them to apply. We're looking at adding that staff as soon as we possibly can. We're also working on defining our program offerings so that we can put together new materials to go out to businesses with and make this a really appealing opportunity and alternative for people driving alone. And that is the end of my brief presentation. I would love to answer any questions that you all have.
Questions, yes. Commissioner Starkey.
I think this is a great program, and I'm not sure it's out there in the public as much as we would like. And I wondered if you had any kind of video piece that I could put on my county television station that could recur, automatically.
We don't yet, but one of the things we are doing is developing a marketing plan. So having video as part of that, video certainly is powerful, and we will look at including that as part of the list. Thank you.
Even for now, if you have something static, we can put a picture up on our.
Okay, yeah, we can put something together for you, definitely.
I think all the counties should have something that.
Yeah, and I believe at your places you have a little one-pager, which we give out to employers that kind of explains the program, what the offerings are. It's all on one page, what some of the benefits are. So we can provide that to you also if you'd be interested in having that.
Well, I need it in emailed to me so that I can email it to our
Yeah, absolutely.
staff.
Commissioner Bellamy.
Yes, I understand what you're saying about the county lines from the Manatee County perspective. I don't understand it, shall I say. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. So Manatee County is part of FDOT District 1,
Okay.
and District 1 is handled by a group called Rethink Your Commute. So you still have commuter services, it's just not TBARTA that manages it for you.
Commissioner Kemp, did you want to have a comment?
Well, I have a lot of questions,
Oh, good.
actually. I really have thought the van pool program was a great opportunity that hasn't been deployed enough. And I know when I first came on to TBARTA, there was a really long presentation as to kind of all the things, metrics, requirements, and all that. And I don't know if that has changed much since then. And so I have, so how many van pools are currently in operation?
We have 145 right now,
145.
and they're anywhere from 4 to 14 people in the van pools.
4 to 14 people. Is there a minimum requirement of the number of miles that they need to go?
You know, I've asked that question. David asked the same question the other day, and I haven't heard back from Enterprise. They weren't in the building yesterday. Typically, I believe it starts to be a good value for the van pool participants when you're going farther than 20 miles.
Right, but I
I'm not
thought
sure
that there was a TBARTA FDOT requirement in the past, and I asked you that question because I thought that there was a requirement in order for the van subsidy to occur through FDOT, that it was a requirement, I thought at the time of TBARTA, that it had to have a minimum number of miles, but you don't know anything about that?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out.
Okay, because it's really different if it's just a recommendation in terms of, what it should be than rather what it must be.
Right.
And then typically you try to get, I think it's just valuable for people to know this, I guess. Typically you try to get at least 2 people, because if one of who is volunteers to be driver is responsible for the van, and they may go on vacation or whatever else, and so you're looking for 2 people that would take that kind of responsibility.
Well, I believe it's a minimum of 4 people to form a van pool.
Right, but I mean 2 people in terms of the drivers.
Oh, I'm not sure the detail of that. I believe there is a primary driver, and then there could be a backup driver.
Okay, and then the person who is the key person out of the group, that takes responsibility, they can use the van on weekends and evenings, and they have like full-time access to it.
I believe they're given a certain amount of miles beyond the commute that they're able to use it for.
Okay, I was just, and then in terms of the 145 van pools, where do, it would be great to see some heat mapping. I understand that basically they go to 2 locations, huge numbers of them, which are MacDill Air Force Base and the Veterans Hospitals. Can you speak to where they go to, where the most and the numbers? Do you know that?
I don't have that information. Enterprise manages where all of those start and end. I can certainly get the information for you. We could invite Enterprise to come and give you a whole presentation too about how their service works if you'd be interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested. I'd also just be interested in, seeing kind of where the routes are. Because I think when I asked before, we had about 100 vans, like about 2 years ago, basically 92 or something like that. And I hadn't known, but it turned out like 89 went to MacDill out of those, and most of them from South County, Hillsborough to MacDill. So I just would like to understand what the outline is, who uses it, how it's used.
Sure, but the majority of the vans are in and out of Hillsborough County. Enterprise has recognized that this Tampa Bay market is a huge opportunity for increasing vans to and from private companies or non-government entities. So they have brought on a full-time account executive whose sole purpose is finding new business in the Tampa Bay area. So she's done a really good job of reaching out into the community and bringing new vans on board.
And for the individual riders, or the carpool people, what is their cost and what is the subsidized cost?
Well, for the van pool, TBARTA pays the first $400, and then the cost per rider really depends on how many people are in the van and how far they're traveling. It could be as little as $100 if you have a giant van and it's full of people, or it goes up from there.
Okay. Okay, I think that's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? Thanks for that great report.
Thank you
And
so much.
I think the board would benefit by an updated presentation from Enterprise as to routes and all of that now, because that's evolving as we go along.
Absolutely. We'll put that on agenda for the future meeting. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our information items. The chair's report, I have just some brief comments, and I know we kicked this around with the policy committee, and that's the scheduling of the committee meetings. And we are going to try at the next board meeting to have, I think, the policy committee and the finance committee scheduled prior to the meetings at a kickoff about 8:45 or potentially earlier if we have both committee meetings. I wanted to get a consensus from the board that that's doable for everyone to come early, or does the board prefer other scheduled meetings? Because it's been hard to get quorums in a lot of these, and it seems to be easier in general to meet prior to the actual board meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
as Chair of Finance and Legislative.
what hit your,
Oh, sorry. Thank you. As Chair of Finance and the Legislative Committee, the June TBARTA board meeting is a bit problematic because I don't know about my fellow county commissioners here, but I will be over at FAC in Orlando. And so I don't know how I'm going to be able to get back to TBARTA at 8 or 8:30.
that specific question was my next comment, that seemed to be a conflict with a lot of county commissioners here too. And I've instructed staff to look into potentially changing that meeting.
Yeah, and I apologize, because I have never missed a TBARTA meeting, so unfortunately, if that's the date. Are you going to FAC?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Are you going?
logistically, I think that makes sense to see if we can change that meeting date,
Thank you.
yeah. But in general, is everyone in consensus that going
But yeah.
forward? Yes,
Yes, I think we had this discussion in our committee meeting that it would be more convenient, especially for those of us who
right.
live far away, that we put it all on the same day.
That's where we're heading. Any
agree.
other commissioners have any comments on that?
Well, I missed the legislative update, I'm sorry. I did a California rolling stop and got caught. So I was a little detained. Didn't give me a ticket, though. So, we tried to make it so that we could do some of our committee meetings by phone. Is that a dead issue?
Yeah,
Or
it
can we
didn't
work?
pass.
I know it didn't pass, but can we work on it again?
Oh, yes.
It's on the
Because
line to work on.
I didn't work on it, I should have, but I didn't, and I'm happy to talk to my legislators. Because it seems to me for committee meetings, since we're only making recommendations, we're not taking formal action for the board, that they should allow this. So I would like to switch to the day meetings for now, for everything on the same day, but I want to bring this up to the legislature again in the next session.
Yeah, that was on the agenda earlier this morning, and we're gonna do that, and potentially look at a whole omnibus, rewording and a cleanup of the whole bill itself, because it has some other aspects to it that need that, but that's the priority to get
Great.
next session, so, point taken. As a follow-up to that too, I do think that because of the legislative session, we do need to schedule the legislative and finance committee and policy meetings for a longer session prior to that September board meeting.
We're on it already. Doyle's going to work with Jennifer, and we'll get that done ASAP.
Yeah, and I would encourage all board members to attend those things and maybe even make it kind of a workshop where we can kick around a lot of ideas. So we will look forward to that presentation, especially with summer travel coming up for a lot of folks. Good. That concludes my report. I'm going to now recognize David for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Just a brief update for you this morning. I want to take a moment to thank Bill Ball for his presentation on the regional TDP Envision 2030. He talked a little bit during his presentation about public outreach, and I want to emphasize that I think the most important part of putting together such a plan is the public input. And we're spending a lot of time with the survey, pushing that out, and attending events throughout the 5 county areas. And I believe we sent a link to the survey out to all the board members as well. I want to request if any of you all, particularly the commissioners, have any ideas or suggestions on how we can distribute that survey throughout your communities and your individual counties, please let us know. We are open to those comments and suggestions because we really need to get as much input as we possibly can from everybody throughout our region in order to develop what TBARTA's role is heading into the future and what people want to see in terms of a regional transit network connecting activity centers throughout the 5 counties. So we would appreciate that input.
David, in our utility bills, we always put a flyer, and we perhaps could add a blurb in there with a link. And I'm sure the other counties probably can do that too, so if you get something to us, I can talk to my utilities department.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Oh, David.
Yes, Janet.
Yeah, I thought at our last board meeting, we had talked about, at this meeting, we would have an update and a real presentation on where we are with the revision of our website. And we didn't have that, but are we going to get it sometime soon? Because that's a great vehicle to push people to embed the survey in it. And if we had something like that was electronic, we could potentially get it out through our communications department within county government, who has over 50,000 pieces of, contacts in there. And I think that would be very valuable in terms of our county, and I'm sure probably the other commissioners might have the same thing.
David, any
Yes, the website project is progressing nicely. We have transferred all the data to FKQ, the website developer that they need in order to continue moving forward with the project. The project was discussed during the policy committee meeting last week, and there was a request to add that to next month's agenda to discuss at the policy committee, but we can certainly bring that to the board as well.
I just think it'd be nice to see where we are.
Absolutely. Any other questions for David?
So if I could.
Yeah, just continue on with
report.
the other business. Okay, yeah.
So you may recall that we awarded a contract last month for the PD&E of the regional BRT project, and that has been going well. We held a kickoff meeting on May the 9th, and we have since, in terms of immediate next steps, reached out to all the board members in order to schedule one-on-one meetings with the consultant, and the purpose of those meetings is to reorient everyone to the project and kind of explain what the process is moving forward with the PD&E process. And we appreciate everyone's cooperation in scheduling those meetings with us already, and we look forward to sitting down and talking to you more about that. In terms of future meeting topics, as was indicated earlier, barring any unforeseen delays with the audit, we will bring a report of the audit results to the board in June. We're also working to reschedule the Brightline presentation from a couple months ago. We were hoping to have Bob O'Malley back today, but unfortunately he had another conflict. So we will get him back in front of the board as soon as we're able to schedule that with him. And we also are intending to bring Ed Taranchik in front of the board next month to talk about the regional ferry service project. I spoke to our federal lobbyist, Van Scoyoc. They're interested in doing a presentation to the board and updating you all on things that are occurring on Capitol Hill. And as noted during Cindy's presentation, we'll reach out to Enterprise and schedule a presentation from them as well. I do want to make one other note related to Enterprise and the van pool program. Yeah, I don't think we've really scratched the surface in terms of the potential that we have with that program. We have increased the number of vans on the road every single month since November. Every month has been better than the next. And we've had several meetings with the Enterprise folks, and they see the potential of the program as well. In addition to us bringing Cindy on board as our director of commuter services, they have also hired a person dedicated specifically to the Tampa Bay market in order to conduct outreach to various employers in our region to increase the number of van pools. So not only will that help reduce congestion, improve air quality, and reduce the number of single occupant vehicles on the road, but again, those miles will come back to TBARTA and only help us with the number of 5307 federal dollars that we're able to tap into for capital purposes. So we're just really excited about the potential we have with that program. And that concludes my report.
One question I have on that, on the commuter services, and maybe Secretary Nguyen can elucidate here. I'm not certain as to the exact policy of District 7. I know other districts deploy in peak hours high HOV lanes that encourage commuter services. What is the position of District 7 on that, or is it mandated by Tallahassee, or is it up to the districts to designate those lanes?
Yeah, we would not be able to just as a district designate high occupancy vehicle lanes. We have to go through studies to determine the impacts of doing that, and we don't currently have anything in that. The closest thing we have right now is the managed lanes studies, but we don't have any HOV lane projects in the works right now.
Okay. Is that something that would be worth looking at, or is it something that the district has made the determination it's not germane right now?
It certainly is something we could look at. We're not now. We'd have to look to see where and how they could be. But to be honest with you, that's not something we've looked at in a long time in this area.
Okay.
Following that, what's your opinion on them? Do you think they work? I've used them in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they work?
I think it probably depends on where they are and what impacts it has on the overall, traffic that uses the lane now, and where they can go. And so speaking just speculatively, it's hard to say whether it would work in a particular corridor versus somewhere else. In South Florida, they've converted high occupancy vehicle lanes into managed lanes. But there's also, a lot of the lanes that were high occupancy vehicle lanes remain that way because of the funds that were used and the restrictions on how those funds could be used. And so if they were specifically designated for a high occupancy vehicle project, then they were kept on there. There were other times where, for many years, there were HOV lanes in Orlando that they weren't enough usage in the lane, and so they, over time, I think what happened was they just stopped enforcing the HOV portion of it. So couldn't really speculate on if they would work, but we don't have anything currently in the works just for HOV itself. Could they be worked into a managed lane? There's always the possibility that a managed lane could also allow HOV over a certain occupancy. The challenge then becomes, how do you determine and enforce the number of people in the vehicle? So, yeah.
Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you for raising that. It's something that a few years ago I had, I know with the prior secretary, raised several times. Because as I understood it, so Miami does have HOV, in their managed lanes, they do have high occupancy vehicles also.
I'd have to check and see. Well, I think they do in some, and it was based on the source of the funding that was provided to them for the construction. It may have said you have to do that. So I think that there are some portions of it, not all of it, though.
Because I had looked extensively, done my own survey throughout the country of the managed lanes everywhere, and I couldn't find a single example of a managed lane that didn't have, because it just to me made total sense to have, but this is what I had found, is that every single one of them had hot lanes, the congestion as well as the HOV discounted in some way or free to encourage the use of those lanes. And I guess a lot of that was because, as you say, they didn't build new lanes. They restriped the highways and made the lanes narrower, and used some of the existing right-of-way on the sides. And then they converted the lane, as I think they're doing in Miami. It basically took the HOV lane and made it the congestion lane. So, I mean, I think it's really, I don't know of other places, although there may be some, I'm not sure, that have exclusive, that do not allow for HOV, which I just think is incredibly important. Like for instance, our van pool program, I mean, for people to use that, it would just seem like it would make sense. And in the day and age of apps and tracking, it just would seem to me also to make sense that you could turn your app on somehow or something and have account for, 3 people in a vehicle, if that's something like that. It just seems like that, that kind of monitoring hasn't caught up in a way that could help us in this area, if that's a problem, because that's what I keep hearing is a problem. The other thing that I'd like to really have looked at is the possibility, because I think I've read at least a few times about a lane being set aside for trucks and truck traffic, which is really overtaking us in big ways, especially now that people aren't using retail and deliveries, and that for our vehicle miles traveled, they went down for the first time in history prior to 2007. So it was not the crash that made it go down. Our area was a little bit later than that, but it's still hit by 2007. A lot of the country was 2003. Now I know, like in 2015, they start to rise again, but a lot of that, or at least some of that rise, is, I think, believed to be connected to delivery traffic, which would make sense to me, since fewer people are using it to go out, but more are using for delivery. So I'd also like to see if we could have the possibility of looking at it looked at in terms of if we have an extra lane. I think it would really help people to, it makes sense to me that business would pay to have a more quickly deliver, and the truck traffic also kind of, it's tough on our roads, and we're all paying additionally for the needs of our roads in terms of our truck traffic. So it just would seem to me in all ways to make sense to at least examine that as a possibility.
Yeah, and I would say that, there are things like registered car pools and van pools that could qualify to use the lanes. So, I mean, there are ways. It's just hard if you have 3 or 4 people in the vehicle and you don't have a registered car pool, how do you tell? But I think there's technology working on moving that forward. One of the things the department's done in the last probably year, you may remember at one time, basically the policy of the state was any new capacity on the interstates would be managed, toll managed lanes. We've kind of now taken the word toll out of that and said they don't have to necessarily be tolled managed lanes. In some places, dynamic tolling may be the right tool for congestion management, to manage the tolls during the peak periods so that you can kind of influence the demand and keep the travel time reasonable for the vehicles that use it, as well as a transit corridor. Other places it may be that the managed lane should, like you say, be a truck lane, or should it be a fixed toll that is only at certain times of the day? And it's not a variable toll, it's 50 cents, it's $1, but it's always the same during those periods. So we are taking a step back and saying it doesn't always need to be a tolled lane. It can be a different type of a managed lane. So we're opening, I guess, our horizons on what type of management we want to have on that capacity. The underlying thought being, though, that if you just provide more general purpose lanes, you're just going to have more congestion, more congested lanes. So we got to find tools to manage traffic and hopefully provide a reliable travel time corridor within the congested environment.
Okay, just another, I'm just wondering about in terms of nationwide too, I know that there's lots of pushback in state legislatures about congestion management lanes. I mean, in Virginia now, for 10 miles, the average commute is $38, and it gives them a few minutes faster, and it's only the 10 miles. And that's each way, by the way. In Miami, the top dollar was $10.50, but it started going above that, I think. And people in Miami, there was incredible pushback. From what I hear, the lanes there are congested, the congestion management lanes are congested and moving very slowly. But in order to get them to move more quickly, they would have to up the toll. And when they upped the toll, the pushback was incredible, and that there significant moves in the state legislature now. They have limited the toll to $10.50, which keeps the road, that lane congested. But also there's significant moves, I think, in the legislature in the state of Florida, coming predominantly from South Florida, which has been affected by this, to limit tolls, to drop tolls, to look at other options, like you say. So I'm just wondering, from the legislative end of it, because I expect that as we move forward, there could be significantly more, limits put on what could be done. I don't know if you can address any of that.
Yeah, and the managed lanes in South Florida have been very popular, but they are, because they're very popular, at times they do get to the point where they reach the maximum, like you say, $10.50. And at that point, they start charging the minimum to people, because if you're not getting the benefit of the toll lane, then they don't want to charge you the maximum amount just to be going at a slower rate. But they are in the same time asking for more capacity there. The express bus system is probably the biggest success they've had in the express lanes, and they're limited now by the amount of parking spaces they have in the park and ride lots, because they say more people want to use the buses for express bus, but they can't find anywhere parks. That are working on expanding the parking there. You mentioned the Virginia one, and I looked into that because I was really interested. And what I found, which was surprising to me, is you may know in Virginia, in that area, they have roads that are HOV-only roads. I mean, it's not a lane, it's a whole road.
Right.
And what they found was, although it does jump up to $30, $40 sometimes, there's only a very few people that actually pay that, because if you have, like you said, the HOV and all that, you can ride in it for free, and so 95% of the people riding it are those categories, and it's a very small element that actually pay that $30, $40. But nonetheless, the formula's driving that price up. And so I imagine that we'll continue to refine our formulas, within the limits that the legislature sets for us in terms of what we can and can't charge. Again, the intent is not to try and make it so that it's so darn expensive to ride it that only very, very, very few people would elect to do so. Is to try to find that way to provide the reliable travel time corridor that will benefit transit, that will benefit those businesses that may need to have the reliable travel time, the emergency services, other things that currently, if you're just in a congested roadway where every lane is congested, you don't have any way to get around it. So it's not easy, for sure.
So just in terms of the discussions, I also had done a lot of research on how the express bus system is working in South Florida. And I just think it would be very valuable for this board to go forward with two different, we've talked about some presentations, but to also start to understand and learn more about what's going on in terms of the congestion management or the management lanes, and have some presentation on that, but also on the express bus system and how it works. In South Florida, how it's worked since the beginning, what exactly they do. Because basically, the express bus systems there, which are working very well, and they're also paralleled by the Tri-Rail corridor to some extent, and then Brightline, but Brightline doesn't promote itself as a commuter option. But one of the things is they have 3 stops in Miami downtown, as I understand, I'm just naming one of the express bus routes, goes, 50 minutes to Fort Lauderdale, has 3 stops there, that goes 50 minutes back. I mean, no stops in between, the 3 and the urban areas and back and forth, and, the kind of, I think it's a well-designed and express bus system. Also, that's being paid for operationally by the toll lanes. And so that's another part of it. But I just think it'd be very valuable for this board and others to be, understand more about kind of how these systems, some of the information about these systems.
We can get a presentation on both of those, get some folks to come in and talk to you. I can also tell you that at one time, the revenue, the purpose of the express lane being tolled is not to generate revenue. And so that was a misconception, and part of that was we were using that money at one time to pay back the construction of the facility, and now we're no longer doing that. And so those funds are available to be used for things like operations of transit within the express lane system, as long as we're covering the cost of just the maintenance and operations of the facility itself. So we can get some folks from our central office and from South Florida to come in and brief you on these items.
Commissioner, I concur with that, and I think in conjunction with the Bright Line presentation, a continuing presentation on that, and to your point with trucking lanes, when I was on the Transportation Commission, that was one of our most salient issues, because the cost to the consumer and to the country as a whole by trucks sitting in traffic is astronomical, the economic impact. And I know Miami and the Port of Miami has done some good stuff with dedicated trucking lanes coming through the tunnel and so forth. So it is a very worthwhile point to make, and it's certainly germane to everything we do here to look at those things informationally, because there's not one thing we can do, there's a combination of things. So it's a point very well taken, and thank you for that. David, any other comments or any other questions?
Have we started charging on the managed lanes on the Suncoast yet?
No, they're just charging the base amount right now. They're gonna wait until they find that congestion will demand that they charge more. Right now, they haven't hit that point, and so.
We'll get there.
We'll get there probably, right, you're right, but
We have
so far
40
not.
people a day moving to Pasco County.
Well, although we are wrapping up we did provide an additional lane at the south end to connect that down into the State Road 60 corridor, and that's being built right now, so we should provide a little bit better relief for folks coming in additional capacity southbound.
Right, other questions? David, does that conclude your report? Yeah, our final order of business is any new business. Is there any new business to come before the board? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Adjourn without objection. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting.
Get ready to go away with the
Get a nice long for that.
all my playing that's gonna be. I know I'm going to see. That's what we said at the. That's gonna be. I was able to buy tickets.
Yeah, and we can do it.
Tickets yesterday in Roque, which is not so bad.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.